this segment, the practice of equipment lending is explained by Celtic Capital President and CEO Mark Haffner.
Many asset-based lenders will lend against equipment. At Celtic Capital, we do a lot of equipment lending, both connected with accounts receivable loans and on a standalone basis. So there are different types of valuations when looking at the value of the equipment. The highest value is typically your in-place market value, and that's the market value of the equipment if it's in the facility, doesn't have to be moved, and is a turnkey operation. So if you're selling your business and it's going to stay where it is, that's the highest valuation. There's also market value, which is similar, but the difference is if it's not staying in place and it has to be moved. And then there's the two most common ones that asset-based lenders lend against. First is the orderly liquidation value and the forced liquidation value. The difference being the forced liquidation value is what the equipment is worth if it were sold at an auction today, versus an orderly liquidation, which is if you have potentially up to 6 months to sell the equipment. The auctioneer or the borrower has the ability to go out and find the targeted buyer for certain pieces of equipment or to sell it in bulk to a strategic buyer, and they have the time to do that. So different lenders will lend on different valuations, but as I mentioned, the asset-based lenders will typically lend against either orderly or forced. Celtic Capital lends against forced because we're dealing with a higher credit risk borrower, and typically if the borrower fails, we don't have the time to do an orderly. We typically hire an auctioneer and it goes to auction. And so we're lending against that forced liquidation value. Some asset-based lenders, typically if they're lending to larger companies, know that they'll have the time because the company will do more of a wind down. And so they'll have the time to liquidate that collateral over a period of time. Lenders also then advance at different advance rates against the equipment. Some as little as 70%, others up to 90%. Celtic Capital lends it typically at 80% of forced liquidation value. On occasion, we've gone a little higher depending on the situation. One of the issues we frequently run into is whether the equipment is encumbered or not encumbered. And oftentimes the borrower will tell us, oh, here's an old appraisal of the equipment, it's worth X, and it's all unencumbered. And then as we dig into the deal, we find out, oh no, some of it is encumbered. So it's important for the bank or intermediary to have a clear understanding with the borrower of what's encumbered and what's unencumbered, so you can effectively communicate that to the asset-based lender that may be lending on the equipment to help take out the bank loan. And the last thing that's important is the landlord relationship. When lenders lend against equipment, they want to make sure that they have unfettered access to the premises in order to get to their equipment should the need arise. And so the lender will typically execute a landlord agreement or a landlord waiver with the landlord, stating that the landlord will give the lender possession of the premises should they need it in order to liquidate their collateral. Sometimes these agreements can be a bit dicey because the landlord really sees no value in it, but the value to the landlord is getting their building back with all the equipment removed so that they don't have to deal with it themselves. So those are some of the key components that we look at when lending on equipment.
Thank you for listening today. If you'd like to talk to Mark Haffner about your specific business financing issue or about making referrals to Celtic Capital, sign up for a quick one-on-one chat with him at www.celticcapital.com. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to our podcast channel to hear more business financing insights from Celtic Capital.